It's hard to believe, looking at the crumbling cities of the Rust Belt, that anything once got done here. But it doesn't take much digging to find the remnants of what assuredly soon will be a forgotten chapter in American history. Within living memory, scores of cities in this country were vital, in every sense of the word, not only to the United States, but the whole world. They teemed with activity, people that lived and worked for a glorious future. Now only rust, rubble, and a struggling population remain. Paterson is the archetype of the Rust Belt, America's first foot into the industrial world, and one of the poster children for America's post-industrial future. The centerpiece of the city of Paterson was and remains the Passaic River and its great falls. In pre-colonial times, the river was the territories of the Acquacanonk and the Hackensack Lenape bands. The Lenape used the river extensively for fishing before being pushed out of the region by Dutch settlers, themselves displaced from the newly conquered province of New York. The oldest and nearest settlement to Paterson is Little Falls, just a bit up the river from the Great Falls. But the site of Paterson didn't attract much attention until after the Revolutionary War. The American colonies had a reliance on the factories of Great Britain as a function of triangular trade. The American colonies exported raw materials such as cotton, fur, wood, among other things, as well as certain goods manufactured to a more shelf-stable or portable stage, like rum, tobacco, or foodstuffs like dried or preserved meat and flour. In exchange, the British exported manufactured goods such as machines, iron and steel, textiles, and trade goods like tea and spices. Even before the American Revolution, the urge to industrialize was practically unstoppable in at least the northern colonies. Laws protecting British manufacturers included the 1749 Iron Act, which mandated the colonists export their pig and bar iron to Britain while encouraging the importation of finished goods made in Britain over local-made items. The act expressly prohibited the colonists from producing knives, scythes, sickles, and other edged tools, in addition to nails and tin-plated sheet iron. The act was widely ignored and massively under-enforced. After the Revolution, the need for increased industrial capacity was a foregone conclusion. The Society for Establishing Useful Manufactures was the idea of Philadelphia-born political economist and delegate for Pennsylvania to the Continental Congress, Tench Coxe. Coxe and Alexander Hamilton co-authored what is considered to be Hamilton's magnum opus, Report on the Subject of Manufactures. The Report on Manufactures, as it's often shortened to, advocates for a strong central government, encouraging industry and coordinating infrastructure projects. The work advocated for the government to provide subsidies, tax breaks, and other forms of support to American industry. In order to help it grow, in turn the industry would be a boon to the people and government. When Alexander Hamilton was made first United States Secretary of the Treasury, Coxe was made first Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. In 1791, New Jersey, under the direction of Hamilton and Coxe, chartered the Society for Establishing Useful Manufactures, a private state-sponsored corporation with the express purpose of developing industry around the Passaic River. That same year, the Society founded the city of Paterson, naming it in honor of New Jersey's second governor, William Paterson. The Society first hired Pierre L'Enfant, who had drawn the initial plans for Washington, D.C., to harness the Great Falls power for the planned mills. L'Enfant began working on a channel cut from the rock and an aqueduct to power the mills. The Society started to get antsy when L'Enfant went over budget and replaced him with Peter Colt, who designed a system of reservoirs to quickly get power to the mills. By the middle of the 19th century, the lower efficiency of Colt's design became a problem, with a new system taking heavy inspiration from L'Enfant's original plan. The society next hired Englishman Thomas Marshall, who claimed to have been the superintendent of Sir Richard Arkwright's Mason Mill in Derbyshire. The society's initial attempts found their own mill failed to make enough money to cover startup costs. In 1796, the society changed tactics to that of developing land near the falls and retaining control over the dams and raceways that would power the privately owned mills. The switch to managing the river and falls as a power supply saw success. By 1820, Paterson had 13 cotton mills and increased its population from an initial 500 residents to 5,000 residents in just those 20 years. In the 19th century, Paterson became a center for immigration. Many of these immigrants were skilled weavers, and some even brought with them industrial secrets from their former employers. By the Civil War, Paterson had been completely outcompeted by steam-powered textile mills in New England. The city's economy transitioned in the intervening decades to steel production and manufacturing. Paterson hosted many factories, including Samuel Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, where he made his first production revolvers. Though Colt had to liquidate his assets in response to non-payment from the U.S. Army, whose soldiers often broke the rifles and pistols attempting to clean or modify them. The Army decided that Colt had supplied them with substandard equipment, and the company's assets were auctioned off in 1843, forcing Colt to partner with the Whitney Armory in Connecticut, where the company's manufacturing would remain. Rogers Locomotive and Machine Works, founded by Thomas Rogers, Morris Ketchum, and Jasper Grosvenor, operated from 1832 until it merged with the American Locomotive Company, ALCO, in 1905. Rogers produced more than 6,000 locomotives at its Paterson factory and continued to produce trains for the ALCO until 1913, when the factory became a parts warehouse. Rogers' factory still stands today as host to the Paterson Museum. In 1872, the Hinchliffe Brewing and Malting Company opened a large brewery at 63 Governor Street, which produced 75,000 barrels of beer at peak production. The brewery still stands today as a warehouse, and according to LoopNet, is currently being renovated as of 2024, but it also said that last year when I researched this paper, so who knows. In 1890, 4 Paterson breweries, Spratler and Mennel, Graham Brewery, the Katz Brothers, and the Burton Brewery, consolidated after a deal with an unknown English business syndicate negotiated to purchase the 4 companies. Though the purchase fell through, the negotiations between the individual companies inspired them to consolidate their own operations. Neither Hinchliffe nor this new consolidated brewing survived Prohibition, though Spratler and Mennel tried to revive the brand in 1939, unfortunately failing by 1941. The lot where Consolidated Brewing's brewery seemed to operate at 248 Marshall Street hosts nothing but ruins. John Philip Holland, Irish-born teacher and engineer, began working on his idea for a submarine he had envisioned while recovering from a broken leg. In 1875, he submitted his first design to the Navy, but the design was rejected as unworkable. Dejected but not deterred, Holland received clandestine funding from Fenians, Irish Catholic rebels operating in America for the downfall of Britain and Irish freedom. After a process of trial and error, Holland's second prototype, officially the Holland II, but as the funding wasn't so covert, the New York Sun newspaper labeled it the Fenian Ram, a name which stuck. After that, Holland and his Fenian benefactors parted on bad terms over money, the Irishman even stealing his Holland II and III prototypes, though they didn't really know how to operate them. Holland 3 sank in the East River, and Holland 2 only got as far as Connecticut before the Irish stashed it in a shed on the Mill River. Holland continued to submit designs to the Navy until in 1900 his Holland 6 was commissioned as the USS Holland. The company that built Holland's designs, Electric Boat Company of nearby Elizabeth, while now owned by General Dynamics, still produces submarines for the U.S. Navy at facilities in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Paterson's nickname is the Silk City, and while outcompeted for the processing of king cotton, Paterson would become the seat for the Queen of Fibers. The first silk manufacturers began operating in Paterson in the 1840s, but the industry didn't take off until after the Civil War. By the 1880s, Paterson was producing half the silk made in the United States. Paterson again had ample supply of skilled immigrant workers, namely weavers from Naples. Paterson did not escape the problems of the Gilded Age. In 1913, the industrial workers of the world organized a 20,000-strong citywide strike off the back of a series of smaller strikes beginning in 1909, with the goal of reducing the workday to 8 hours. The strike failed and resulted in over 1,800 arrests, 2 deaths, one of a bystander, Valentino Modestino, shot by a private guard, and striker Vincent Madonna, killed by a strikebreaker. The failure is largely attributed to mill owners diversifying out of Paterson, with satellite mills elsewhere not being swayed by the IWW. Likewise, Paterson did not dodge the troubles of the Great Depression, with a Hooverville appearing on the outskirts of the city. Paterson got a gust of wind in its sails from wartime production, which stalled the city's downward spiral. Paterson's silk mills by this time produced 50% of finished silk and 80% of the silk supply available to the Allies. Due to silk's use in parachutes, the vast majority was requisitioned. This caused smaller firms, namely Allied textile printers, to retool their facilities to use DuPont's new nylon family of synthetic polymers for commercial production of mostly stockings. By far the largest employer in Paterson during the war was Curtiss-Wright, who employed just over 50,000 people to operate their 2.3 million square foot factory. The facility on the Passaic River constructed over half of their wartime production of engines for the B-17 Flying Fortress and Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber. The Paterson factory also produced engines for M4 Sherman tanks and engines for the experimental M6 heavy tank, of which only 40 were produced and none saw combat. In 1945, the Society for Establishing Useful Manufacturers, due to the drawing down of industry, was unable to maintain their charter and were acquired by the city government of Paterson. After the war, Paterson, like many other towns and cities in the Northeast, started experiencing the beginnings of deindustrialization. Racial tensions in the 1960s culminated in the long hot summer of 1967. Riots broke out in the nearby New York City, Newark, and Plainfield. The next year, riots sparked by the assassination of Martin Luther King rattled even the most diehard members of the community. These riots in no way only affected the named areas. Anyone with the money to do so left the ailing urban centers for greener pastures. This includes Paterson. Paterson was largely unable to compete in the new service economy, with urban decay in the latter half of the 20th century scaring off both businesses and customers. Nearby upscale malls in Wayne and Paramus killed any chance of Paterson organically revitalizing itself. In 1994, portions of Paterson became an urban enterprise zone, reducing state sales tax by half, contributing to the revitalization of the city. In 2011, Hurricane Irene caused the Passaic River to rise to historic heights, leading to major flooding in the city. In 2020, just over 1/4 of the city's residents were unemployed. Patterson today is a hub for immigrants, with the fastest growing Dominican community in America, and hosts a Peruvian consulate due to the large number of Peruvian immigrants around Western Market Street in an enclave known as Little Lima. Patterson is also home to the second largest Muslim community in America outside of Dearborn, Michigan, comprised mostly of Turks, a growing number of Syrians and Bangladeshis, with a sizable minority of Palestinians. Patterson also hosts the largest number of Circassian people in the United States. To speculate on the future of Patterson is about as foolish to speculate on the future of America itself. But I believe, so long as the citizens stick by their motto, by hope and effort, things might just work out with a little bit of hope and a lot of effort. Maybe Patterson can blaze a new trail for all of America to follow boldly into a better future. Thank you for watching or listening. If you could do me a favor and like the video and subscribe to Mid-Atlantic Chronicles, it would do a lot for me personally. If you have a city in the Mid-Atlantic region you think has an interesting history that doesn't get a lot of attention, feel free to leave a comment and I might just make a video about it. Thank you.